Have you ever heard a dead man whisper your name? That's how it started for Ethan Cole, one rainy night standing before an old cemetery gate that should have been locked for decades. Ethan wasn't supposed to be there. He was a journalist, sure, but not one of those fearless types who hunted ghosts or chased murderers. No, he wrote about forgotten towns, lost highways, and America's strange corners that most people preferred not to think about. But when he got an anonymous email reading, "If you want the story of your life, come to Hollow Creek Cemetery tonight at 11:13 p.m. Come alone," he couldn't resist. The cemetery lay 3 miles outside Hollow Creek, a town barely breathing on the edge of Kentucky woods. Locals whispered about it, the place where no bird dared land, where fog rolled in even on windless days, and where people sometimes heard the dead calling for help. Ethan parked his rusted Chevy by the crooked iron gates. His flashlight beam cut through the mist, landing on a wooden sign that read, "Hollow Creek Cemetery, Eastern 1892. The letters were almost erased by time. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the gate. It was cold, colder than the rain, colder than November. He felt something. A vibration? No, more like a faint hum beneath his fingertips, like a heartbeat pulsing from the metal. He almost turned back, but then a whisper brushed past his ear. "Ethan." He froze. "Who's there?" His voice cracked. The wind didn't answer, but the gate creaked open by itself, as if inviting him in. Inside, the cemetery stretched like a sea of darkness. Tombstones leaned at impossible angles. Names had been eaten by moss and time. The fog curled between them like living smoke. Ethan followed the narrow gravel path deeper in, guided by the dim beam of his flashlight. He could hear something else now, soft murmuring like dozens of voices talking just beneath the ground. When he crouched down, pressing his ear to the cold earth, he could almost make out words. "Help us. Help us." He jerked back, breath fogging in the air. This was no prank. A flash of movement caught his eye. A figure standing by a large oak tree near the back of the cemetery. "Hey!" Ethan shouted. "Who are you?" No answer. The figure didn't move. It looked like a man wearing a long coat, maybe in his 50s. Ethan started toward him, boots crunching over gravel and wet leaves. The closer he got, the more wrong everything felt. The fog thickened, swallowing the headstones behind him. His flashlight flickered. When it came back on, the figure was gone. In its place stood an open grave, freshly dug. The soil around it was dark and wet, as if turned over just hours ago. A wooden coffin sat inside, half buried. Its lid was cracked open, revealing blackness inside. Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. "This has to be a setup," he muttered. "Some sick joke." He knelt down, gripping the edge of the coffin. Inside, there was no body, only a voice. "You shouldn't have come here, Ethan." He stumbled backward, falling into the mud. The voice had come from the coffin, low, raspy, and close enough to make his bones ache. He scrambled to his feet, looking around wildly. "Who's there?" But there was no one. Only the fog, only the graves, and that open coffin whispering his name again. Then he saw it. A piece of paper lying on the coffin lid. It was soaked, but a few words were still visible. "Find the headstone with your name. Before sunrise." Ethan's breath hitched. He looked around. Hundreds of headstones surrounded him, stretching into the mist. The sound of whispers grew louder, coming from all directions now. "Find it. Find it, before they do." He turned and ran, scanning headstones with his flashlight. Each one bore strange carvings, dates scratched out, names half erased. Some stones were cracked open, revealing hollows like empty eyes. Then, he froze. There it was, a tall, pristine headstone, untouched by age. The letters were freshly carved. Ethan Cole, born June 4th, 1988. Died November 3rd, 2025. His flashlight slipped from his hand. The beam swung wildly across the fog as his mind went blank. No, this isn't possible. He ran his fingers over the letters. They were real, deeply cut into the marble. He stumbled backward, gasping for air. His watch ticked 11:59 p.m., and then, somewhere behind him, a shovel struck dirt. Once, twice. He turned slowly. The man in the long coat was back. This time Ethan could see his face pale as ash, eyes hollow like empty graves. The man smiled. "You're late." Before Ethan could react, the ground beneath him caved in. He fell, down into darkness, into earth that felt alive, clutching at him like hands. He screamed, but the fog swallowed the sound whole. The last thing he saw was the man's face leaning over the hole, whispering, "Welcome home, Ethan." Then everything went black. When Ethan regained consciousness, everything was silent. Not the kind of silence that follows sleep or shock, but a silence so thick it felt like it had weight, pressing against his skull. He blinked several times, his eyes adjusting to a faint grayish light filtering through cracks above. He was underground. The air was heavy with the smell of damp soil and rot. His fingers brushed against coarse dirt, splinters of wood, and something softer, something that felt like fabric. He turned his flashlight on. Its weak beam revealed that he was lying inside a narrow wooden box, a coffin, half filled with soil. Panic surged through him like a jolt of electricity. He slammed his palms against the lid, but it barely budged. He screamed until his throat burned, kicking and thrashing, but the only response was the soft rain of dirt falling through the cracks above. He wasn't just buried alive. He was trapped with something. His hand brushed that same fabric again, and when he pulled it closer, he realized it wasn't fabric at all. It was a sleeve wrapped around an arm, cold, stiff, and unmistakably human. He froze. The arm belonged to a corpse lying beside him. The face was inches away, decayed beyond recognition, its mouth open in a frozen scream. Ethan gagged, turning away, but there was nowhere to go. The coffin was barely wide enough for his shoulders. Every breath tasted of soil and death. Then, through the pounding of his own heartbeat, he heard it. A faint tapping sound. Tap. 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 It came from above, rhythmic and slow, as if someone were walking across the ground above his grave. He tried to scream again, but the air was thick, his voice barely escaped his throat. He started pounding the lid, desperate, shouting hoarsely, "Help me! I'm alive! Please!" The tapping paused for a moment. Then came a soft dragging sound, followed by a whisper right above his ear, muffled by the wooden barrier. "You shouldn't have looked for your grave, Ethan." The voice was the same, the man from the cemetery. Ethan's pulse raced faster. "Who are you?" he shouted. "What do you want from me?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, a new sound began, a scraping noise like metal against wood, something sharp cutting into the coffin lid. Dust rained down over his face. He shielded his eyes, coughing violently as the scraping grew louder, closer. And then suddenly, light poured in. A pale hand reached through the hole. Not to grab him, but to offer him a way out. Trembling, Ethan seized it, and the next second he was being pulled upward, his body dragged through mud and roots until his head burst above ground. He gasped for air, clawing at the earth until he was fully out. He collapsed beside the grave, coughing dirt from his lungs. When he looked up, the man in the long coat stood over him, face hidden beneath the brim of a rain-soaked hat. His coat was torn and covered in mud, his boots half sunk into the earth. "You weren't supposed to wake up," the man said softly. Ethan tried to stand, but his legs were weak. "Who are you? What the hell is this place?" The man tilted his head. "You already know. You just don't remember." Ethan stared at him, confused and terrified. "Remember what?" The man didn't reply. Instead, he turned and began walking toward the fog-shrouded mausoleum at the center of the cemetery. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then followed, every instinct in his body screaming that he shouldn't, but his curiosity refusing to let him go. The mausoleum loomed ahead, built of crumbling marble, its iron door chained shut. Strange symbols had been carved into the stone, circles intersecting with lines, forming something that looked halfway between a sigil and a map. The man stopped before it, pressing a hand to the cold surface. "Do you hear them?" he asked. Ethan strained his ears. At first he heard nothing. Then, a faint chorus of voices echoing from inside the tomb. They were whispering, crying, pleading. "Set us free. Set us free." Ethan took a step back, shaking his head. "What is this?" The man turned, his face now partly visible under the flickering light of Ethan's flashlight. His skin was grayish, almost translucent, veins faintly pulsing beneath the surface. His eyes, cloudy white, like those of a corpse. "This ground doesn't keep the dead," he said. "It holds the forgotten." Ethan swallowed hard. "Forgotten?" The man nodded slowly. "Those whose names were erased, whose deaths were denied. This place remembers them all, and now it remembers you." A chill ran through Ethan's spine. "Why me?" The man gave a faint smile, one that didn't reach his dead eyes. "Because you opened the gate." The air around them shifted. The fog seemed to thicken, and a low rumble echoed beneath their feet. The ground trembled, and several tombstones cracked down the middle. Ethan stumbled, gripping a nearby headstone for balance. The man didn't move. He simply whispered something, words Ethan couldn't understand. The chain on the mausoleum door rattled violently, then snapped. The door creaked open. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of decay and something older, fouler, something ancient. Ethan aimed his flashlight inside. Rows of stone coffins lined the walls, each carved with symbols. But at the far end of the chamber stood something different, a mirror, a full-length, ornate mirror, with a black frame shaped like twisted roots. The man stepped aside. "Go ahead," he said. "Look." Ethan hesitated. Every nerve in his body told him not to move closer, but he did. He wiped the dust from the mirror's surface, expecting to see his reflection. But there was nothing. No image at all. Just blackness, as if the mirror refused to acknowledge him. Then slowly something appeared. A figure standing behind him. He spun around. No one was there. When he turned back to the mirror, the figure was still visible, standing over his shoulder, its face obscured by darkness. Ethan stepped back, heart hammering in his chest. "What is that?" The man in the coat didn't answer. He only whispered, "That's you, Ethan. That's what's left." The reflection raised its head, and Ethan saw its face. His face, but pale, hollow and grinning with rotted teeth. The mirror began to crack. A thin line split it down the middle, spreading like lightning. From the crack, a sound emerged, soft at first, then growing louder. It was laughter. Ethan stumbled backward as the reflection reached toward the glass. The surface rippled like water. And then, a voice whispered from behind him again. "You're not the first to come back. You just might be the last." The laughter turned into screams. The mirror shattered. Shards flew outward, slicing through the air like glass rain. Ethan shielded his face and fell to the ground, his flashlight rolling away. When he looked up again, the mirror was gone, and so was the man. Only the mausoleum remained, silent and empty. But from somewhere deep below, he could still hear the whispers. This time, they were calling his name again. "Ethan, Ethan, we remember you." His breath trembled as he backed out of the tomb, tripping over a root and crashing to the ground outside. The fog swirled around him, thicker than before, almost liquid. The sky above the cemetery was changing, dark clouds spiraling unnaturally, a storm gathering without wind. And in the distance he saw something moving between the headstones. Dozens of shadowy figures, rising from the ground, slowly, silently, crawling toward him. Ethan stumbled backward as the figures emerged through the mist, pale silhouettes dragging themselves from the wet ground, their movements slow and deliberate, as though fighting against invisible chains. The fog made it difficult to tell how many there were, 10, 20, maybe more, but their shapes were unmistakable. Human, dead, but moving with eerie purpose. Their faces were hidden, yet Ethan could feel their gaze pressing against him, hollow and hungry. He turned and ran. His boots sank into the mud as he sprinted down the narrow gravel path, his flashlight beam jerking wildly. Every few steps he looked over his shoulder, expecting to see the things chasing him. But they didn't run. They just kept walking, closing in, their silent persistence more terrifying than any scream. The cemetery stretched endlessly now. The path that had once been short seemed to twist and wind through endless rows of gravestones. The gate he'd entered from was nowhere in sight. He passed mausoleums, statues, and crosses, each more weathered and ancient than the last, yet somehow none of them looked familiar anymore. It was as if the whole graveyard had shifted around him, like a maze that refused to let him leave. His breath came in ragged gasps. His hands shook violently as he tried to reload his flashlight's batteries. It flickered, then went out completely. The darkness swallowed him whole. For a few moments he could see nothing at all. Only the soft glow of the moon struggled through the fog. Then he heard it again. Whispers, hundreds of them. They came from everywhere, the trees, the graves, the very soil beneath his feet. Some were crying, some praying, others murmuring his name over and over again. He clutched his ears, shouting, "Stop, stop it!" But the voices only grew louder, overlapping, turning into a rising tide of madness. Suddenly a sharp voice cut through the rest, a woman's voice, clear and trembling. "Ethan, help me." He froze. That voice. It sounded familiar. He turned slowly, scanning the fog. "Who's there?" he called. "Who said that?" A faint shape emerged near an old willow tree, a woman in a long white dress, her hair tangled and soaked from the mist. Her face was pale but unmistakable. Ethan's chest tightened. Sarah? Sarah Winters, his ex-girlfriend, the one who had gone missing 3 years ago while covering a similar story in a nearby town. They'd found her car by the woods, but never her body. He had blamed himself for convincing her to take the job. He took a cautious step toward her. "Sarah, how are you here?" Her eyes glistened, reflecting faint moonlight. "You shouldn't have come back, Ethan," she whispered. Her voice was shaky, like a recording warped by static. "They'll take you too." Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. "Sarah, I thought you were dead." She shook her head slowly. "We all are." He stopped breathing for a moment. The words hung in the air like frost. Then she lifted her hand and pointed toward the center of the cemetery. "The Hollow wants you. Don't let it take your name." "The Hollow," he repeated, confused. But before he could move closer, Sarah began to fade. Her skin grew translucent, her features dissolving into mist. Ethan reached for her, shouting her name, but his fingers passed through cold air. And as she vanished, a shadow rose from where she had stood, a darker shape, crawling upward from the ground like smoke. It had no face, no eyes, just a black outline of a man, its surface shifting like water. The temperature around Ethan plummeted. His breath turned to vapor. The shadow moved toward him, each step silent, each movement unnervingly human. Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over a broken gravestone. His flashlight flickered back to life, briefly illuminating the shadow, and for a split second, he saw his own reflection within it. Himself, but twisted, eyes sunken, lips sewn shut. He screamed and threw the flashlight at the figure, but it passed through harmlessly. Then the ground beneath him cracked. The earth split open in a jagged line stretching across the cemetery, releasing a foul stench of rot. From the fissure, countless hands reached out, skeletal, muddy, writhing like worms. Ethan scrambled away on all fours as the hands grasped at his legs, clawing, pulling him toward the gap. He kicked wildly, feeling fingers scrape against his boots. He managed to grab a nearby headstone and pull himself free, but the voices grew louder, overlapping in painful, inhuman tones. They weren't calling his name anymore. They were chanting something else. A single phrase repeated again and again. "Return what was taken." Ethan staggered to his feet. "What do you want from me?" he shouted into the darkness. "What did I take?" The chanting stopped all at once. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then a single voice, calm, deep and cold, answered from behind him. "Your place." Ethan turned slowly. Standing only a few feet away was the man in the long coat. His face was clearer now, skin gray and cracked like stone, lips dry and colorless, eyes black pits. He was holding something in his hand, an old photograph. He handed it to Ethan. "You don't remember this, do you?" Ethan hesitated before taking it. The photo was old, creased, and water-stained, showing a group of men in front of the same cemetery gate. All of them looked like miners or workers from the early 1900s, except for one. The man standing in the center looked exactly like Ethan. Same eyes, same face, same faint scar above the left eyebrow. His stomach turned. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. "That's not me." The man's expression didn't change. "You think time forgets? You think the ground forgets?" "I don't understand." Ethan began, but the man stepped closer, cutting him off. "You died here once, Ethan. You came back when you weren't supposed to. You took a name that wasn't yours." Ethan felt dizzy. The photo trembled in his hands. "No. I was born in 1988, not what?" The man smiled faintly. "Not 1898. Ethan's mouth went dry. He wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as some insane trick, but the man's tone, the fog, the graves, everything around him felt too real to dismiss. The man turned away. "Follow the whispers," he said. "They'll show you the truth. But hurry, before they decide to keep you." And with that, he walked into the fog and vanished once again. Ethan stood there, shaking, the photograph still in his hands. The whispers had returned, softer now, guiding him deeper into the cemetery. Against every instinct, he followed them, one hesitant step at a time. As he walked, he passed a row of new graves, graves that hadn't been there before. Each had fresh dirt, each bore a single unmarked headstone. But when he brushed the dirt away from one of them, his heart stopped. The name carved into the stone read, Sarah Winters born, 1993, died, 2022. He took a step back, trembling. Then he realized something else. There was another grave right beside hers. The name on it made his blood run cold. Ethan Cole, born 1898, died 1925. His flashlight flickered, then went out completely. And from somewhere deep beneath his feet, a heartbeat began to echo, slow, heavy, and getting closer. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the pair of graves before him. His name carved twice into the cold stone, one from a life he remembered, and another from a time he never lived. The fog seemed to tighten around him like a living thing, pressing against his lungs, whispering through his hair. The air was charged with a strange static hum that made the tiny hairs on his arms rise. He stepped closer to the older gravestone, the one that said 1898 to 1925, and brushed his fingers across the carved letters. The surface pulsed faintly beneath his skin, warm like flesh. He yanked his hand back, heart hammering. The stone. It had moved. Then came the sound again. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, steady, rhythmic, like a buried heart beating from within the soil. It was coming from beneath the old grave, growing louder, more desperate. Ethan dropped the photograph and stumbled backward, eyes wide. "No," he whispered to himself. "No, this can't be happening." But it was. The ground beneath the stone began to crack. A jagged line split through the earth, and dark soil poured outward like blood. The air grew cold, breath visible in the fog. A faint voice rose up from beneath, weak at first, then stronger. So familiar it made Ethan's blood run cold. "Ethan, Let me out. It was his voice. He shook his head violently, backing away. No, that's not possible. But the voice came again, pleading, broken. Please, it's so dark down here, help me. The earth trembled, the grave shifting as if something beneath was pushing against it. Ethan's flashlight flickered and flared, illuminating a pair of pale hands clawing through the dirt. He stumbled, nearly tripping over a broken cross. The hands reached higher, trembling and desperate. Then the face appeared, covered in mud, half decayed, yet unmistakably his own. The same eyes, the same jawline, the same scar above the eyebrow. It gasped for air like a drowning man breaching the surface. Its gaze locked with Ethan's, and for a moment, time froze. Who are you? Ethan whispered. The figure coughed, its voice rasping. You know who I am. You took everything from me. Ethan shook his head, terrified. No, I didn't take anything. The corpse gave a wet laugh. Then why does the ground know your name? The thing climbed higher out of the grave, its fingers clawing into the soil. Its body was dressed in torn 1920s clothing, suspenders, a dirt-streaked white shirt, and boots rotted through. As it stood, it towered over Ethan, swaying like a puppet held up by unseen strings. Its eyes were full of rot and pain. I remember when they buried me, it said slowly. The cold, the worms, the silence. But then you came. You opened the gate. You woke us. Ethan's hands trembled violently. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't wake anyone. The corpse tilted its head. Every story you've written, every name you've spoken into ink. You gave us voice again. You brought us back. He didn't understand. His mind was spinning, memories colliding in his skull, his journalism, the articles he wrote about forgotten towns, abandoned cemeteries, vanished people. Was this what the message had meant? Find the headstone with your name. His pulse roared in his ears. He turned the page. The next was filled with notes. His notes. He recognized his own handwriting, describing Hollow Creek Cemetery, the local legends, the date and time he had arrived. But there was more. Entire paragraphs he had never written. Descriptions of his death, of his body being buried, of the man in the long coat watching over his grave. No, he whispered. This isn't mine. But when he turned to the last page, the words there chilled him to the core. The writer always becomes the written. Suddenly, a noise echoed from the back of the chapel, a door creaking open. Ethan turned sharply, holding the journal like a weapon. A shadow slipped through the doorway and stepped into the candlelight. It was the man in the long coat again. His face was darker now, more decayed. His voice was quieter, almost sorrowful. You weren't supposed to read that, he said. Ethan gritted his teeth. Tell me what's happening. Who are you? The man stepped closer. You called me here, Ethan. I am the keeper of this ground. Every name written here belongs to me. You should have stayed forgotten. I didn't write any of this, Ethan shouted, waving the journal. Someone is doing this to me. The man's eyes gleamed faintly. No, Ethan, you did this to yourself. Every time you wrote about the dead, you bound yourself closer to them. The cemetery doesn't just hold bodies, it holds stories, and now it's writing yours. Ethan looked down at the journal again and watched in horror as fresh words appeared on the page before his eyes. He looks down at the book, realizing he can never leave. His breath caught. The pen wasn't moving, but the ink was still spreading, forming letters, describing his every thought, every movement. He dropped the journal and ran for the door, slamming into it with all his strength, but it wouldn't open. The candle flames flickered violently, and the whispers began again, echoing off the chapel walls. You wrote us. Now we'll write you. The candles went out all at once, plunging him into total darkness. And in that silence, something began writing again. Slowly, rhythmically, like a quill dragging across parchment. Ethan turned toward the sound, trembling. In the pitch black, The man's voice whispered one last time. Welcome to your own story. The night had grown colder, the mist thicker, wrapping the cemetery in a ghostly shroud that seemed almost alive. Ethan's flashlight trembled in his hand as he moved deeper into the graveyard, each breath a small cloud of white in the chill. Somewhere behind him he could still hear Mia's distant sobs fading into the night, her figure swallowed by the fog. He wanted to go back for her, but something in the air, something unseen, pulled him forward. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was compulsion. Something deep beneath the earth was calling him. He stopped near an ancient oak tree whose gnarled roots burst through the cracked soil like the fingers of something buried too long. The air here was heavy with decay, the stench of rot almost unbearable. His flashlight beam danced across the gravestones until it landed on one he hadn't seen before, its inscription half erased by time. The letters were faint, but he could make out enough to read. Eleanor Graves, beloved daughter, 1849-1864. 14 years old, dead for over a century and a half. The earth beneath her stone was uneven, as if it had been disturbed. Ethan crouched, brushing away leaves and bits of old dirt. He froze, fresh soil, recently turned. His pulse quickened. Someone had dug here, or something had tried to get out. Suddenly the ground beneath his hand felt wrong, soft, as if breathing. He pressed again. The soil moved like something beneath it had shifted. Ethan stumbled backward, his heart hammering. Then came the whisper. It wasn't from around him. It was below him. Ethan. His name, spoken softly, stretched out like the sigh of the dead. He fell backward, scrambling away, his flashlight flickering. The whisper came again, clearer now, an echo rising from the earth. Help. Me. He stared at the grave, frozen in disbelief. The soil was moving, slowly sinking in the center, as though something was pushing from beneath. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet wouldn't obey. The sound grew louder, scratching, faint but deliberate, fingernails against wood. He wanted to shout, to call for Mia, but his throat was dry. Then, as if some invisible force urged him forward, he found himself on his knees again, his trembling hands brushing away dirt. He dug, shallow at first, then deeper, until his fingers hit something solid. Wood. The coffin. Ethan gasped, pulling his hands away. The scratching had stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a soft thud, from inside the coffin, followed by another. He staggered backward, shaking his head. No, this isn't real. A voice whispered again, softer now, almost pleading. Don't leave me. Please. And then came the smell, sweet and foul at once, the unmistakable stench of death and something far older. He dropped the flashlight, its beam rolling across the ground until it landed on something that made his stomach twist. A hand, pale and bloated, poking through the soil near the coffin's edge. It twitched. Ethan screamed and stumbled back, his legs tangling in roots. The flashlight went out, plunging him into total darkness. The only thing he could hear now was the faint creak of wood, and then the sound of something rising. The earth shuddered as if rejecting what was beneath it. He ran. Branches clawed at him as he tore through the mist, the distant sound of movement following him. Slow, dragging steps. His chest burned as he sprinted toward the gate, but the fog was disorienting. He could barely see 5 feet ahead. Every direction looked the same. Ethan! The voice, Mia's, cut through the fog. Relief surged through him. He turned toward the sound and saw her silhouette emerging from the mist. He rushed forward, grabbing her arms. Mia, we need to go. There's someone, down there. Her face was pale, eyes wide. I heard it too. A voice. It said my name. Before Ethan could reply, a sound rose behind them. A low moan like wind through a hollow throat. They turned, their flashlights flickering back to life for a moment. And there, at the edge of the fog, they saw her. A girl in a dirt-stained white dress, her long hair hanging wet and tangled over her face. Her bare feet left muddy prints as she took slow, uneven steps toward them. Her hands were covered in soil. Her lips moved, but no sound came out until her head tilted sharply and her eyes locked onto Ethan. "You dug me up," she whispered. Ethan froze. The voice, it was the same whisper from the grave. Her expression twisted in sorrow and fury as she took another step forward. The fog around her seemed to pulse with each breath she took, and the ground beneath her feet shimmered like water. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers blackened as if burned. "You shouldn't have come here," Mia screamed, grabbing Ethan's hand and yanking him backward. They ran, tripping over gravestones and tree roots, the sound of the girl's sobs echoing behind them, soft, broken, and impossibly close. Then the ground gave way. Ethan fell hard, tumbling into what felt like an open pit. He hit the bottom with a thud, the air knocked from his lungs. Dirt fell around him. He looked up, Mia's terrified face above him, her flashlight trembling. "Ethan, I can't—" The soil around the pit began to shift again, sliding inward as if the earth itself were closing its mouth. Ethan clawed at the sides, but the walls were too soft. He looked up one last time before everything went dark, and saw a pale hand reach for Mia from behind. She turned. Her scream echoed through the night as the light from her flashlight went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The whisper returned. But this time it wasn't just one voice. It was many. "Stay with us." And then, something cold brushed Ethan's ankle. He screamed. The sound of Ethan's own heartbeat thundered in his ears as the soil caved around him. Every gasp filled his lungs with dust and decay. He could no longer see the stars, no longer hear Mia's voice, only the low groan of shifting earth and that chorus of whispers, rising like the rustle of 1,000 unseen mouths beneath the ground. He tried to move, clawing upward through the collapsing dirt, but his hands met only soft mud and something worse, something textured, cold and almost fleshy. It pulsed faintly under his fingertips as if alive. He yanked his hand back in terror, heart slamming in his chest. Then, just when the weight of the soil threatened to crush him, his body slipped through something, an empty pocket in the ground. He fell again, hard, landing on stone instead of earth. The air was thick with the smell of mold and old rot. Ethan coughed violently, fumbling for his flashlight, praying the batteries hadn't died. When he finally switched it on, the beam pierced through the darkness, and what it revealed made his blood run cold. He was in a tunnel, a vast one, hollowed out beneath the cemetery. The walls were lined with bones, human bones, fitted together like bricks, skulls embedded between them like silent sentinels. Old, rotting wood planks stretched overhead, barely holding up the weight of the world above. And across the stone floor, carved into the ground with something sharp, were strange circular markings that pulsed faintly, almost like veins. Ethan's mind screamed to find a way out, but his curiosity, his fatal flaw, pulled him deeper. He followed the tunnel, his footsteps echoing softly. The air grew colder with every step. Water dripped from somewhere above, hitting the stone in rhythmic beats, like the ticking of an unseen clock. After what felt like several minutes, he saw a dim light flickering up ahead, a dull yellow glow like candlelight. He moved toward it cautiously, pressing his back to the wall as he neared the corner. He peered around it and froze. A small chamber opened before him, lit by half-burnt candles placed in a circle. In the center of that circle lay something wrapped in old, tattered sheets. A body, maybe, or something shaped like one. The candles cast long, trembling shadows across the room, and the air vibrated faintly with an unholy hum, so low it made Ethan's stomach twist. He took a hesitant step forward. The sound grew louder. He leaned closer to the wrapped figure, his flashlight shaking in his hand. The fabric was damp, darkened with stains that looked too much like dried blood. And then, as if reacting to his presence, the figure moved. Ethan stumbled backward, tripping over a bone. The The shape inside the sheet twitched again, and a faint gasp, like someone taking their first breath in centuries, escaped from within. The candles flickered wildly. One by one, they went out. "Ethan." The voice came from behind him this time, low, soft, female. He turned sharply, raising his flashlight, and saw Mia. She stood in the doorway of the chamber, her clothes torn, her hair matted with dirt. Her eyes were wide and distant, her lips trembling. Ethan rushed toward her in relief. "Mia! Thank God, are you okay? I thought—" But as he got closer, something in her expression stopped him cold. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, they weren't the same. The irises were dull, cloudy, like something that hadn't seen light in a very long time. She tilted her head slightly. "You shouldn't be down here, Ethan." His flashlight flickered, and for a split second, her reflection appeared wrong. The light passed through her as though she wasn't completely solid. "Mia?" His voice broke. "What happened to you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly lifted her hand and pointed to the figure on the floor. "She's waiting." Before Ethan could respond, the sheet began to shift again. The fabric peeled back just enough for him to glimpse what was inside. His mind recoiled instantly. The skin was gray, mottled, stretched thin over bone. But what froze him completely was the face. It looked almost human, almost alive. He took a step backward. The face twitched. The lips cracked open. "Let me out." Ethan's body locked in terror. The voice came not from the lips, but from inside his head. He felt it echo through his skull, twisting his thoughts. He turned to Mia, but she was gone. The doorway was empty. The tunnel behind him was swallowed in pitch black. Panic surged through him. He spun around again, only to find the sheet now completely pulled aside. The body was gone. Then came the sound, a dragging noise, like something wet sliding across the stone floor. He shined his light toward it, but the beam barely reached. The sound grew louder, closer, and then just at the edge of the light, he saw a figure crawling toward him. It was the girl from the grave, Eleanor. Her head tilted unnaturally to one side, her neck bent at a grotesque angle. Dirt fell from her dress as she dragged herself forward, her nails scraping against the stone. Her mouth hung open, whispering words too soft to understand. Ethan stumbled back, clutching his flashlight like a weapon. But the moment he turned to run, another figure emerged from the wall, literally through it. The skeletal remains that lined the tunnel were no longer still. Skulls turned, eye sockets hollow but aware. Bones shifted, cracking and sliding against one another. The walls were moving. The entire tunnel seemed to come alive, pulsating like some massive organism. The whispers filled every inch of the space, hundreds of voices murmuring in unison. Ethan ran blindly, the light bouncing wildly, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The tunnel twisted and turned, deeper and deeper, until suddenly the floor vanished beneath him. He fell again, this time landing in shallow, ice-cold water. The flashlight slipped from his grasp, floating a few feet away. He grabbed it, flipping it up just in time to see what surrounded him. Dozens of wooden coffins, half submerged, all open. And every single one was empty. Ethan's stomach twisted as he turned in a slow circle. The water rippled faintly, disturbed by something unseen. Then, from the darkness ahead, a low, guttural voice whispered, closer than before. "You woke them, Ethan." The water behind him stirred violently. He spun around and froze as pale hands burst from the surface, clawing at his legs, his clothes, pulling him downward. Faces began to rise from the black water, eyes blank, mouths gasping silently. He screamed, thrashing wildly, but there were too many. Cold fingers dragged him under, choking out the last of his breath. The light dimmed above him, fading slowly as the whispers grew louder, surrounding him entirely. And then, just as the world began to fade, a voice, soft and familiar, cut through the noise. "Ethan, it's me." Wake up. Mia's voice. His eyes flew open. He was lying on the ground again, back in the cemetery. Morning light was breaking through the fog. Birds were singing. Everything was calm. He sat up, gasping, his body shaking. The graves looked normal. The oak tree stood silent and still. The pit where he'd fallen was gone, filled completely, as if it had never existed. "Mia?" he called weakly. No answer. Only one thing had changed. The gravestone before him no longer read Eleanor Graves. It read, Ethan Cole, 1997-2023. His blood ran cold. Miles's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the glowing screen. His laptop camera light blinked faintly, even though he had disabled it years ago. On the live feed, he saw himself standing perfectly still in the center of the room. But something was wrong. His reflection wasn't mirroring him anymore. While Miles remained frozen, the figure in the feed tilted its head slowly to the side, its mouth twitching into a half-smile that wasn't his. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened around him. The soft hum he'd heard before was now pulsing through the apartment's walls, almost like a heartbeat. He took a slow, trembling step backward, and the figure on the screen took one forward, then another, until it was right up against the edge of the camera's frame, staring directly at him, eyes black as the fog over Hollow Creek. "Enough," Miles whispered, more to himself than to it. He lunged forward and slammed the laptop shut. The light snapped off. Silence returned, save for his pounding heartbeat. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt watchful. He grabbed the hard drive, stuffed it into a desk drawer, and began pacing. "It's just a recording," he muttered. "An elaborate hoax, some kind of augmented reality thing." Yet deep down he knew better. There had been no trick. He'd seen something that didn't belong in this world, and worse, it had seen him back. Trying to calm his shaking hands, Miles unplugged every device in the apartment, the laptop, the router, even his phone charger. Then, as a final measure, he yanked the blinds shut and turned off the lights. For the first time since retiring, he felt like a rookie again, terrified, cornered by something invisible. He poured another drink, his mind racing. The Hollow remembers, Lena had said, a sentient place feeding on memory. If that was true, then maybe, just maybe, it had reached through the footage to mark him as its next witness. The more he thought about it, the clearer the pattern became. The cemetery, Ethan Cole, Lena, now him. Each one drawn in by curiosity, each one trying to uncover the truth, and each one ending up part of the Hollow's story. The apartment lights flickered. Miles froze mid-step. He looked toward the kitchen where the bulb over the sink was pulsing. Dim, bright, dim again, like it was trying to signal something. Then he heard the faint scratching. It came from the drawer that held the hard drive. Miles's throat went dry. He approached it slowly, every sound in the apartment amplified. The creak of the floor, the ticking of the wall clock, the rush of his own blood in his ears. The scratching grew louder, sharper, like nails scraping against metal. Then from inside the drawer, a muffled voice whispered, "Miles, watch it again." He stumbled back, nearly tripping over a chair. "No," he hissed. "No, I won't." But even as he said it, the urge crept in, an overwhelming compulsion to open the drawer to see. It was as if something deep inside his brain had been rewired, whispering that one more look wouldn't hurt. Just one more glimpse. His hand moved on its own, trembling as he reached for the handle. The moment he pulled it open, the scratching stopped. The hard drive sat still and silent. Then the laptop behind him clicked open by itself. The screen glowed blood red. He turned slowly, every muscle in his body screaming not to. On the screen, the feed had returned, but this time it wasn't live. It showed footage of his own apartment from minutes earlier. He watched in horror as he opened the drawer, turned toward the laptop, and froze, exactly as he was doing now. Then, in the video, something crawled out of the darkness behind his mirrored self. It was long-limbed, pale, and wrong, its movements jerky, as if time didn't flow the same way for it. It placed one skeletal hand on his shoulder and the real Miles felt it. Cold, wet, and impossibly heavy. He spun around, but there was nothing there. When he turned back to the screen, the figure was now closer, its face pressed against the camera lens. A distorted voice seeped through the speakers, layered and ancient. "You looked. Now we remember you." The apartment went pitch black. Miles dropped to his knees, clutching his head as the hum became deafening, vibrating through his bones. The walls seemed to breathe, flexing in and out like the chest of a sleeping giant. The smell of damp earth filled the air. He could feel the hollow now, stretching out beneath him, reaching upward through concrete and steel. And then it stopped. When Miles opened his eyes, the lights had returned. The laptop was gone. So was the drawer, the hard drive, and even his notes. The entire apartment looked untouched, as if the last hour had never happened. He stood shakily trying to make sense of it, when his doorbell rang. For a moment he hesitated. Then cautiously, he opened the door. No one stood there. Only a small unmarked cardboard box sat on the doormat. Inside it was a single object. A camera. Old, dusty, with a cracked lens. He turned it over in his hands and felt a chill run down his spine. Carved into the bottom in uneven letters were 3 words. "Until the next one." He backed away, his breath trembling. The camera slipped from his fingers and hit the floor, spilling open. A film roll unspooled across the tiles, hundreds of tiny photographs, each one showing the same thing. The cemetery gate, the fog, and a faint silhouette standing behind it. But in the final frame, the figure's face was clear. It was Miles. His phone buzzed suddenly. A notification appeared from an unknown number. Backup uploaded. Hollow Creek investigation, Miles Donovan. The file size read 6.66 GB. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible." He turned his phone off, then yanked out the battery just to be sure. But as he glanced at the dark screen, his reflection smiled back at him. Slowly, deliberately. He ran for the door, throwing it open. But instead of the apartment hallway, thick fog spilled in. A graveyard stretched out before him under a colorless sky. He could hear whispers drifting between the tombstones, faint and endless. His eyes darted downward to the nearest grave, and his heart stopped. The inscription read, "Miles Donovan, Keeper of the Hollow." Resting at last. His body went cold. The whispering grew louder until it formed words. "You told the story. Now the story tells you." The fog consumed him, and the apartment was empty once more. The next morning, a maintenance worker found the door locked from the inside. Miles was never seen again. But a week later, an email began circulating among paranormal forums. No one knew who sent it. Attached was a video file labeled simply, "Hollow Creek, Final Cut." And when people pressed play, they swore they saw the same thing. Miles standing in the cemetery, staring at Ethan Cole's grave, whispering, almost pleading, "Don't remember me." The story of Hollow Creek did not end with Miles Donovan's disappearance. It only began to unravel further. The world moved on, as it always does. But beneath the surface of quiet towns and forgotten cemeteries, something ancient stirred again. The fog that had long haunted the hollow began to spread, creeping through nearby woods and villages. Animals fled without reason, electronic devices malfunctioned, and people spoke in hushed voices about hearing whispers at night. No one understood that the story was feeding, growing stronger through each person who dared to speak its name. Months after Miles vanished, a young researcher named Nora Keller arrived in town. She wasn't there for ghost stories. She was a historian, digging into old municipal records for a book about unmarked graves across forgotten settlements. When she stumbled across Hollow Creek Cemetery, In an 1823 ledger, something caught her eye. The entry was scratched out, then written over again, as if someone had tried to erase it, then decided to let it remain. Next to it were the chilling words: first burial, unknown child, unrecorded, witnesses forbidden. Intrigued, Nora traced the handwriting to an old parish scribe named Elias Rowan, a man who, according to town archives, went mad shortly after the burial and was committed to a sanitarium, where he carved symbols into his walls until his death. Nora thought it was a legend, until she found one of his journals locked inside a wooden chest in the town library basement. The pages were brittle, stained with something dark, but the ink still whispered its story. The child was not born, Elias had written in shaking lines, but found. Found at the edge of the hollow after the storm. She did not cry. She did not breathe. Yet the ground bent beneath her. Nora read on, each entry worse than the last. He described the child growing cold but never decaying, her eyes open for weeks, unblinking. Villagers feared her, calling her the Hollow's daughter. When they finally buried her, the fog came for the first time, rolling down the valley and swallowing half the town. Elias's final entry was a plea. The Hollow remembers the first grave. She was not meant to rest. Nora sat back, her heart hammering. Every rational part of her mind screamed to stop, but the pull was irresistible. She booked a small cabin on the outskirts of the old cemetery, now abandoned and reclaimed by forest. Locals warned her away, muttering about the mist that hums and the watchers that walk without sound. But Nora was a skeptic. She brought her camera, drone, and research equipment, determined to document everything. On her first night there, the woods were silent. Too silent. Even the insects refused to sing. Nora recorded herself walking through the thick brush until she found the remnants of an iron gate half buried in vines. The rusted letters spelled Hollow Creek. Beyond it lay rows of tilted gravestones, their markings eroded by time. She moved deeper in, flashlight cutting through the darkness, until she reached a clearing. There, the fog swirled unnaturally, coiling around a single stone that was different from the others. It was larger, older, carved from black granite. And unlike the others, it bore no name. Only one sentence. Here lies the first to be remembered. Nora crouched down, brushing away the moss. Her fingers trembled as she touched the cold surface. The hum began. Faint at first, then rising, vibrating the air. Her flashlight flickered, and the fog thickened until she could barely see her own hands. She tried to stand but felt her legs rooted to the ground. From within the mist came a faint sound, the laughter of a child. Her camera began recording on its own. On the tiny screen she saw movement, small footprints forming in the damp soil circling her. She spun around, but there was no one there. Then, the voice came, a whisper so soft it seemed to crawl directly into her mind. He remembered me. Now you must too. The fog burst open, and for an instant Nora saw her. The girl was impossibly pale, her eyes two dark voids, her mouth stitched with shadows. Her dress looked like it was made of ash, and her hands, long and skeletal, reached out with slow, trembling curiosity. Nora screamed and ran. Branches tore at her clothes, roots clawed at her ankles, but the fog chased her, alive and sentient. She reached the cabin, slammed the door shut, and collapsed against it. For several minutes, all she could hear was her heartbeat. Then came the soft knock, 3 times, gentle, rhythmic. She didn't answer, she didn't breathe. The knock came again, followed by the same whisper from the woods. Remember the first. The lights went out. The camera on her table blinked to life by itself. The lens turned toward her, and in the reflection of the glass, she saw not her own face, but the girl's, smiling, waiting. When dawn came, the cabin was empty. Only the camera remained, still recording. Local authorities found the footage days later, but by then, Nora's name had already begun appearing in the same online forums that once spoke of Miles Donovan. Users who downloaded the video reported strange side effects, whispering in their homes, mirrors fogging up without reason, and fleeting glimpses of a child standing in corners of their rooms. Experts tried to remove the file from the internet, but every deletion only seemed to spawn more copies. The metadata always contained the same line of code, looping endlessly. First remembered, never forgotten. And so, the hollow endures, not buried beneath earth or stone, but within memory itself. Each retelling, each curious listener, each replay of that cursed footage feeds it. For the hollow was never about death. It was about remembrance, the kind that doesn't let go. And somewhere, deep in the fog that never lifts, the little girl waits by the first grave, whispering to every lost soul who dares to enter, "Tell my story, so I can find you too." The fog had grown thicker than it ever had before. It no longer stayed confined to the old cemetery. It moved through towns, down streets, slipping beneath doorways and into the glow of computer screens. People who had never heard of Hollow Creek suddenly began dreaming of it, seeing it in flashes between their phone notifications, in the reflection of their dark TVs, in the shimmer of static between channels. The story had become a virus. Every telling, every upload, every whispered retelling was a doorway, and the Hollow had learned how to step through them all. The video Nora Keller recorded was now everywhere. No matter how many servers were shut down, or how many networks were scrubbed clean, it kept coming back. Some swore it uploaded itself from corrupted drives. Others said it appeared as an ad, a random autoplay, or even a suggested video late at night. The footage began the same way each time. Nora standing before the nameless grave, whispering, "Here lies the first to be remembered." But at the end, just before the static, something new began appearing. A flicker. A shadow. The faint outline of the child's face now smiling directly into the camera, as if recognizing whoever was watching. And then came the whisper, not from the video speakers, from the room itself. "You remember me now." Across the country, reports began flooding in of people vanishing without explanation. Entire families found their screens glowing red in the middle of the night. Police dispatchers heard faint humming on the lines before calls were cut off. In one town, a whole neighborhood disappeared overnight, leaving only the thick silver fog behind. The government called it a mass delusion. Scientists said it was a visual hallucination phenomenon triggered by viral content. But the truth was simpler, older, and far more terrifying. The Hollow had found a new home. It no longer needed the cemetery. It lived in the story itself. Miles Donovan's apartment was discovered months later. His laptop was still on, though long drained of power. Written on the wall in his own handwriting was a single line over and over again. "The Hollow remembers what we forget." Investigators who entered the apartment later reported hearing faint knocking sounds through the walls. 3 slow taps, rhythmic and deliberate. And then, one of them found the parchment, the same that once came in the package Miles received. It was blank now, but when they held it to the light, faint words appeared, glowing blood red. "The last grave is dug." That night the fog returned to Hollow Creek one final time. The ground trembled as the nameless headstone cracked open. Beneath it, where a coffin should have been, there was only darkness, vast, endless, breathing darkness. From that pit came a low, mournful sound like wind through dead trees, followed by the soft echo of a child's laughter. Then silence. When morning came, the cemetery was gone. The trees, the graves, even the soil. Nothing remained but a flat expanse of blackened earth. A single object rested in the center. Nora's camera, still recording, the lens fixed on the emptiness. The timer read 0000, looping infinitely. No one knows who uploaded the last version of the footage, but within hours it spread worldwide. People everywhere saw it. The empty field, the low hum, the faint outline of a girl walking toward the camera. She got closer with every replay. Closer each time someone clicked, "Watch again." And when she finally reached the screen, Her whisper was the same one heard by every single viewer, no matter where they lived. You've told my story. Now I will tell yours. Then the feed went black. But even in that blackness, if you listen long enough, if you truly listen, you'll hear it. A faint hum, a single knock, and a child's voice, soft and endless, echoing through your room. Remember me.